So a while back I released a video about Tankies. It's become one of the videos I'm proudest of, and I highly recommend you watch it if you haven't yet. At the same time, some people got pretty annoyed by the thumbnail for the video, which depicted many famous radicals as people that would be called the word Tankies. Again, for context on what this word means, if you don't know, I recommend the aforementioned video. Anyway, I already knew the graphic would get some people angry thanks to the misinformation that's been spread about the people in it. And I would have talked about how people are wrong to think this graphic is wrong in the video if the choice to use it hadn't been after the video already got made. After all, the thumbnail isn't mine, and I actually first saw it from a popular video by Badmouse on Tankies, where Badmouse criticizes the thumbnail by arguing people like Malcolm X, Nelson Mandela, and Stokely Carmichael wouldn't actually be called Tankies. After the criticisms of my thumbnail, I actually watched the video again to confirm my suspicions about it, and after actually doing some really basic, surface-level research on the claims he makes about these people, I was shocked by how many things he gets wrong about these people's intellectual legacies. I don't think Badmouse makes bad videos generally, I don't think he can't make good points, but it's very clear he came into this video with a very specific goal in mind and only looked for whatever evidence suited his goal rather than objectively examining the facts at hand. Anyways, the most insulting and dishonest part of Badmouse is the last part, the incredibly unforgivably stupid section on W.E.B. Dubois. Badmouse mentions that Dubois wrote a little-known essay today, praising Stalin's actions after his death. Of course, Badmouse's excuse for why this doesn't make Dubois a Tankie is because Dubois lived a long time and wrote it late in life, and there had the rest of his life to not be pro-Stalin. So first of all, if there's any person that would get called a Tankie, regardless of their time in life, it's someone that literally wrote a eulogy to the death of Stalin, the archetypal god of the Tankies. The single end-all, be-all of Tankyism, period. But secondly, his argument that Dubois was only a Tankie late in life is wrong on so many levels that it's mind-boggling. For one, Dubois lived almost another 20 years after he wrote his eulogy to Stalin, and after writing the eulogy, he and his even more Tankie-like wife visited the Soviet Union again, and also visited China, where Dubois spoke with Mao Zedong, whom he praised. It gets even more embarrassing, though, because Dubois visited and praised the USSR over 30 years before he wrote his eulogy to Stalin all the way back in 1924 as well. He was a Tankie 30 years earlier. So Badmouse's argument is terrible in both directions. Yes, by the strictest definition of Tankies as hardcore Stalinists who say Stalin did nothing wrong or excuse every single thing he did, yes, Dubois wouldn't be called a Tankie since he occasionally criticized the USSR as well. But that's not how the word Tankie is mainly used by most people. It's just not. And that's not how Badmouse defines it in relation to the graphic either. By almost any modern definition, even though Dubois was willing to criticize the Soviet Union, he was totally a Tankie overall. All of this has been wiped from common knowledge, yes, but it's easy to find if you do, 5 minutes of digging. But this is only the beginning of the falsehoods that Badmouse spreads in his video. Badmouse also implies that Malcolm X wouldn't be called a Tankie, which is just plainly untrue. Just look at the Prospects for Freedom speech by Malcolm X, where he stands in open support of Marxist-Leninist and Maoist countries like Cuba, Vietnam, and China about the people throwing off their oppressors. This was in the 1960s, right after the Red Scare, so just saying this stuff openly was very radical. Malcolm X also famously met and spoke with Castro when he visited America in 1960. Malcolm X also was going to meet Che Guevara in 1964 before a failed assassination attempt on Che botched that. So he had 4 more years to suddenly become anti-Cuba, but he very clearly still wasn't to the point that he wanted to meet one of the main Cuban revolutionaries. As if all of this evidence wasn't already enough, Malcolm X was literally inspired by Mao Zedong to believe socialism could work.
Chinaman's chance. But they don't say that anymore. They used that expression back when China was weak. But now since Mao Zedong has been successful in making China a strong country, the Chinese have more chance than anybody else. So this saying has become outdated. Well, just as it took a strong China to give a Chinese person respect wherever that Chinese person is found on this earth, When we get a strong Africa, the person of African origin or African ancestry will be respected any place on this earth, even in America. But he will not be respected in America until Africa is strong, just as the Chinaman wasn't respected abroad until China became strong.
Malcolm X had not fully developed his opinions at this point, but he was very clearly someone that would have been called a Tankie by many people, and whose intellectual development clearly shows he was moving more and more in this direction. He passionately hated the American government, and he supported socialist states like Cuba and Vietnam and China, even if not very loudly. If that isn't enough to clearly show what he would have been called tanky by a large portion of the people that use that word, then I don't know what else to say. Badmouse then goes on to also be completely wrong about the idea that Mandela wouldn't have been called a tankie. Mandela spoke positively of the USSR as well as of Castro, who he praised and met multiple times, which is not surprising since Cuba played a large role in helping South Africa to end apartheid. He founded a Marxist-Leninist insurgency that bombed railroads and led to his eventually famous imprisonment. Stephen Ellis, one of Mandela's most prominent biographers, wrote that Mandela's positions were based in Marxism-Leninism. Yes, he wasn't anywhere close to a hardcore Stalinist, but I don't know how many times I have to say this for the people that don't listen. Again, by how most modern people use the word, he would have been called a tankie. Anyways, Stokely Carmichael, yet another person that Badmouse says wouldn't be called a tankie, actually definitely would be called a tankie. He went on a visit to socialist Cuba in 1967. He drove around the countryside with Castro and talked to him for hours. The Cuban newspapers reported that Carmichael said it was the most educational, most interesting, and the best apprenticeship of my public life. And before you say, oh, that was just the dishonest Cuban media lying about him, in one of his last speeches before his death, when Carmichael changed his name to Kwame Ture, he again spoke positively of Fidel Castro. Hell, he went to Cuba for treatment for cancer before he died tragically young at 57. Besides Cuba, he also went on to travel to China and Vietnam as well. He also had connections with the militant and ideologically Leninist Black Panthers. But then Stokely Carmichael broke with the Black Panthers for not being radical and militant against the government enough and allying too much with white people. Again, many people absolutely would call Carmichael a tankie for all of this. Thank God Badmouse at least didn't try to pretend Fred Hampton wouldn't have been called a tankie, like someone else I know. Anyways, at the end of this absolutely god-awful, incompetent section of the video, Badmouse asks why tankies have to make these people part of our beliefs, calling it idle mining. The fact is that it's not idle mining at all. The point isn't that having these people in our groups is essential to our beliefs. It's that defending socialist states today is demonized, when these heroes of history, meanwhile, also defended socialist states. What it is defending their intellectual legacies. It's protecting who they are and not letting them get whitewashed by people who engage in extremely dishonest and sloppy history like Badmouse did. Badmouse frames himself in the video as a sort of Leninist or Marxist-Leninist adjacent person, but he's admitted later on that he's actually an anarchist at heart, and the video shows this anarchist bias, because he really just completely ignores so much evidence that contradicts what he's arguing about these people and their actual beliefs and actions. I wish he had actually done some research and hadn't spread wrong information to hundreds of thousands of people, but here we are. In conclusion, Badmouse, either stick to editing videos and not writing them, or actually do the bare minimum of research. I hate to be harsh about this, but that's how anyone who spreads misinformation should be treated until they learn how to actually properly research their claims. Anyways, that's about all I have for this video. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to me on Patreon, where you'll get early access to my videos and Patreon exclusive videos and essays as well.